The day a billionaire knelt in front of a maid, everyone thought he had lost his mind. The truth was far more shocking. I remember the exact moment my life began to change, although at the time, I had no idea it was happening. The grandfather clock in the east hallway chimed 6 times as I carried a basket of freshly folded towels through the Harrington estate. The sound echoed through ceilings so high they seemed to belong in a cathedral rather than a private home. I had worked there for almost 2 years, and yet the place still felt too grand for someone like me. My name is Emily Carter, and back then, most people in that house barely remembered it. To them, I was simply the maid. The girl who cleaned up messes. The girl who quietly disappeared whenever important guests arrived. The girl who existed somewhere between the furniture and the wallpaper. Outside, the Connecticut sky glowed with the soft orange light of late autumn. Inside, preparations for the Harrington Foundation Gala were already underway. More than 300 guests were expected that evening. Politicians. CEOs. Socialites. People whose watches cost more than my car. I moved carefully through the hallways while staff rushed around me carrying flower arrangements and silver serving trays. "Watch where you're going," someone snapped as a catering supervisor brushed past me without slowing down. The basket nearly slipped from my hands. "Sorry," I whispered automatically. Sorry had become a word I used more than my own name. As I turned the corner toward the guest wing, laughter drifted down the hallway. A group of women stood near one of the sitting rooms, dressed in designer clothing and sparkling jewelry. I recognized one of them immediately. Victoria Sinclair. Beautiful. Wealthy. Confident. The woman everyone expected Ethan Harrington to marry. Her eyes landed on me for half a second before she looked away. "Honestly," she said loudly enough for me to hear, "I don't know how people live like that. Imagine spending your whole life cleaning up after everyone else." The women around her laughed politely. My face burned, but I kept walking. That was the thing about humiliation. If it happened often enough, it stopped feeling like a sharp wound and started feeling like weather. Predictable. Constant. Something you simply learn to endure. I focused on the basket in my arms and continued down the corridor. A few minutes later, I stepped into one of the guest suites to replace fresh linens. The room overlooked the sprawling grounds of the estate. From the window, I could see gardeners preparing outdoor lighting for the gala. Everything had to be perfect. The Harrington name demanded perfection. As I smoothed the final corner of the bedspread, my phone buzzed quietly in my apron pocket. I checked the screen. A text message from my grandmother. The woman who had raised me after my parents passed away. "Don't forget dinner tomorrow, sweetheart." I smiled despite everything. She was the one person in the world who never made me feel invisible. I typed back a quick reply and slipped the phone away. Then I noticed something unusual. An envelope resting partially hidden beneath the nightstand. It looked old. Yellowed with age. Not something that belonged in a room meticulously maintained by a billionaire family. Curious, I knelt and carefully pulled it free. My breath caught when I saw a faded Harrington family seal pressed into the corner. There was no name on the front. No address. Just a single handwritten sentence. "For the family of the woman who saved my life." I stared at the words for several seconds. Something about them felt important. Significant. Like a door that had been locked for decades was quietly beginning to open. At that moment, footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. I quickly slipped the envelope back where I found it. I didn't know it yet, but that forgotten piece of paper would eventually change everything. It would destroy lies, uncover secrets, and lead to the day when the most powerful man I had ever met would kneel before the maid everyone else had ignored. I should have forgotten about the envelope. That would have been the smart thing to do. People like me survived by keeping our heads down, finishing our work, and staying out of the affairs of wealthy families. But all evening, those words lingered in my mind. For the family of the woman who saved my life. As the Harrington Foundation Gala began, the estate transformed into something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors. String music drifted through the air. Expensive perfume mixed with the scent of fresh roses flown in from California that morning. Everywhere I looked, people wore confidence as naturally as their tailored suits and designer gowns. I wore a black housekeeping uniform and carried a tray of sparkling water. The contrast could not have been clearer. By 8 o'clock, hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. Laughter echoed beneath the vaulted ceilings while photographers captured every important arrival. I moved quietly between groups, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. Most guests never looked directly at me. Some did, but only long enough to confirm I belonged to the staff. Invisible. That was the safest way to exist in places like this. Then I spotted Ethan Harrington. He stood near the grand staircase speaking with several investors. At 34, he carried himself differently than the others. He did not smile often. He did not speak loudly. He did not need to. People listened the moment he entered a conversation. His dark navy suit fit perfectly. His expression remained calm and unreadable. I had worked in his house for nearly 2 years, yet we had exchanged fewer than 20 words. Still, unlike many others, he always said thank you when someone handed him something. That small detail had never escaped my notice. As I passed one of the dessert tables, a sharp voice stopped me. "Emily." I turned immediately. Victoria Sinclair stood there holding a champagne glass. Several guests surrounded her. "Yes, Miss Sinclair?" I asked. Her eyes moved slowly across my uniform. I am surprised they allow staff to walk through the ballroom looking so plain during such an important event. A few people laughed softly. Heat rushed into my cheeks. "I apologize if there is a problem," I said carefully. "There is no problem," she replied with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I simply think appearances matter." More laughter followed. I lowered my gaze and continued walking. The moment lasted less than 30 seconds, yet it stayed with me for the rest of the evening. Because deep down, part of me wondered if she was right. Maybe appearances did matter. Maybe that was why nobody ever noticed people like me. Around 9:30, I slipped into a service hallway to gather fresh linens from storage. The noise of the gala faded behind heavy wooden doors. For a moment, the quiet felt like relief. Then I saw something that made me stop. The guest room where I had found the envelope earlier stood partially open. A light glowed beneath the doorway. I knew for a fact I had turned that light off hours ago. My pulse quickened. Slowly, I stepped closer. Voices drifted from inside. One belonged to Victoria. The other belonged to a man I did not recognize. "If anyone finds that letter," Victoria whispered, "everything becomes complicated." The man answered too quietly for me to hear clearly. My breath caught. Letter. Not envelope. Letter. Suddenly, the forgotten document beneath the nightstand no longer seemed forgotten at all. My heart started pounding so hard I was certain they would hear it through the door. I froze beside the hallway table, barely breathing as Victoria continued speaking inside the room. "The last thing Ethan needs right now is another complication," she said. "Especially one connected to his father." My fingers tightened around the stack of linens in my arms. Connected to his father. The word sent a chill through me. The Harrington family rarely spoke about Charles Harrington. The founder of the company had passed away years ago, leaving behind a business empire worth billions. To the public, his legacy was flawless. To the people who worked in the estate, he was almost a myth. "Are you sure nobody has seen it?" the man asked quietly. "The letter was supposed to disappear a long time ago," Victoria replied. "It never should have remained in this house." Before I could hear more, footsteps approached from the opposite end of the hallway. Panic rushed through me. I quickly turned and continued walking, forcing myself to act natural as one of the event managers rounded the corner. "Emily," he said sharply. "There you are. We need more staff in the ballroom. Move." Yes, sir. I hurried away before anyone noticed I had been standing near the guest room. But the conversation followed me all evening. By 10 o'clock, the gala had reached its peak. Cameras flashed. Champagne flowed. The orchestra played near the grand staircase while guests discussed business deals worth more money than I could imagine. Yet I could not stop thinking about the envelope. Or the letter. Or why Victoria seemed so worried about it. Near 11, I was collecting empty glasses from a lounge area when a commotion erupted near the entrance. Nothing dramatic. Just a wealthy donor who had suddenly become dizzy. Several guests stepped aside awkwardly. Most seemed more concerned about their conversations than the elderly woman struggling to remain steady. Without thinking, I set down my tray and hurried over. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I asked. Her face had gone pale. "I think I stood up too quickly," she admitted. I guided her carefully to a nearby chair and brought her a glass of water. She smiled gratefully. "Thank you, dear." Of course. It was a small moment. The kind that usually passed unnoticed. Except this time it did not. As I stood back up, I found Ethan Harrington watching from across the room. His expression revealed nothing, but our eyes met briefly before someone approached him and drew his attention away. I immediately looked down and returned to work. Still, something about that glance stayed with me. Not because it was romantic. Not because it was dramatic. Because for the first time since I started working at the estate, I felt seen. Just after midnight, the final guests began leaving. Exhaustion settled into my bones. The ballroom looked like a battlefield of abandoned glasses, wrinkled napkins, and half-finished conversations. Staff members moved quickly to begin cleanup. I was carrying supplies toward the service elevator when I noticed Victoria again. She stood near the front entrance speaking with the same man from earlier. This time I caught only a single sentence before they walked away. "If the wrong person finds that letter," she said, "everything changes." Then she disappeared into the crowd. I stood there for several seconds staring after her. Because deep down, I already knew one thing. Whatever secret was hidden inside that letter, it was important enough to make powerful people nervous. And powerful people rarely became nervous without a reason. The next morning, rain tapped softly against my apartment window before sunrise. I sat at the small kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Normally, my thoughts revolved around grocery bills, overtime shifts, or whether my grandmother needed anything from the pharmacy. Instead, all I could think about was a letter I had never even opened. Everything changes. Victoria's words echoed in my head. Wealthy people did not worry about ordinary problems. If something frightened a woman like Victoria Sinclair, it had to be important. By 7 o'clock, I was driving back to the Harrington estate. The long tree-lined driveway stretched ahead beneath gray skies. The mansion looked just as impressive as always, but for the first time, it also felt different. As if secrets were hiding behind every polished window. The staff spent the morning cleaning up after the gala. Crystal glasses disappeared into storage. Floral arrangements were removed. The magic of the previous evening faded quickly, replaced by vacuum cleaners and supply carts. Wealth always looked effortless from the outside. Up close, it required hundreds of invisible hours from people nobody noticed. Around 10, I received my assignment for the day. Guest wing. The same section where I had found the envelope. My pulse quickened immediately. I told myself it was a coincidence. Nothing more. Still, as I pushed my cart down the hallway, I could not ignore the feeling that something was waiting for me. The guest room stood exactly as I had left it. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. The bed remained perfectly made. Everything appeared normal. Yet the moment I stepped inside, I glanced toward the nightstand. The envelope was gone. My stomach dropped. I knelt anyway and checked beneath the furniture. Nothing. I searched behind the drawers. Nothing. Someone had removed it. For several seconds I simply sat there staring at the empty space. Had Victoria taken it? Had someone else? More importantly, had they known it was there all along? A quiet knock startled me. I stood immediately. The door opened before I could answer. Ethan Harrington stepped inside. My breath caught. In 2 years, he had never entered a room while I was cleaning it. "I apologize," he said. "I thought the room was empty." "No problem, sir." His gaze moved briefly around the suite. Then he looked at me. "You were here yesterday before the gala, correct?" My heart skipped. "Yes, sir." "Did you notice anything unusual?" The question felt innocent. But something about the way he asked it made me careful. "Unusual?" I repeated. "Anything left behind? Documents? Personal items?" For a moment, I considered telling him everything. The envelope. The conversation. The letter. Instead, uncertainty stopped me. I barely understood what was happening myself. "No, sir," I answered quietly. Ethan studied me for a second longer than necessary. Not accusing. Not suspicious. Simply thoughtful. Then he nodded. "Thank you, Emily." "Thank you." Again. Such a small phrase. Yet very few people in his position ever used it. He turned and left the room. I stood motionless until his footsteps disappeared. Then I noticed something lying near the doorway. A folded piece of paper. My heart began racing again. It must have slipped from somewhere when the door opened. I picked it up carefully. Across the front, written in faded blue ink, were 4 words. "Find her before Victoria does." My hands trembled as I stared at the note. 4 words. That was all. Yet they carried more weight than entire conversations. "Find her before Victoria does." I read the sentence 3 times before folding the paper and slipping it into my apron pocket. Every instinct told me to throw it away and forget I had ever seen it. That was what sensible people did when they stumbled across mysteries involving billionaires and powerful families. They walked away. Unfortunately, curiosity has a way of growing stronger once it takes root. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I polished mirrors. Changed linens. Vacuumed hallways. All while my mind kept circling the same questions. Who was she? Why was Victoria looking for her? And why did someone believe finding her was so important? Around noon, I took my lunch break outside near the estate gardens. The rain had stopped. Autumn leaves drifted across the stone pathways while gardeners prepared flower beds for winter. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I felt like I was carrying a secret too large for my own life. My phone buzzed. It was my grandmother. Seeing her name immediately made me smile. "Hello, sweetheart," she said warmly. "Are we still having dinner tomorrow?" "Of course." "Good. I made your favorite pie." I laughed softly. "You always spoil me." "Someone has to." For a moment, the mystery disappeared. That was the effect my grandmother had. She made complicated things feel simple again. Before ending the call, she added something unusual. "Emily?" "Yes?" "Do you ever think about your parents?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes." A brief silence followed. "Your mother was a remarkable woman." "I know. More remarkable than most people ever realized." Her voice carried a strange sadness. Before I could ask what she meant, she quickly changed the subject. After we hung up, I sat staring at the screen. It felt like the second strange conversation I had experienced in less than 24 hours. That afternoon, another surprise arrived. Shortly after 3 o'clock, I was organizing supplies in the service wing when the head housekeeper appeared. "Emily, Mr. Harrington is requesting assistance in the library." I blinked. "Me?" "That is what I said." She looked equally confused. Ethan Harrington never requested specific staff members. I crossed the estate and entered the enormous library a few minutes later. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. Ethan stood beside a large oak desk reviewing documents. He looked up when I entered. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, sir." His gaze settled on me for a moment. "I have a question." My stomach tightened. "Yes?" "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years." He nodded slowly. "And before that?" The question seemed innocent enough, yet something about it felt deliberate. "I lived with my grandmother in Hartford," I answered. "She raised me." His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he had just confirmed something. Before I could understand why, the library doors opened. Victoria entered without knocking. The moment her eyes landed on me, her smile vanished. Then she noticed Ethan standing beside me. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked. Ethan closed the file on his desk. No, but for some reason, I did not believe him. And judging by the way Victoria was staring at me, neither did she. The temperature in the library seemed to drop the moment Victoria walked in. She stood near the doorway in an elegant cream-colored coat, her posture flawless, her expression carefully controlled. Yet something sharp flickered behind her eyes when she looked at me. "Emily was just leaving," she said before either of us could speak. The statement sounded polite. It did not feel polite. I glanced toward Ethan. For a brief second, I thought he might disagree. Instead, he simply nodded. "Thank you for your time, Emily." Time. Not help. Not assistance. Time. The choice of words stayed with me as I left the library. As soon as the doors closed behind me, I heard Victoria's voice begin speaking again, though the thick wood prevented me from making out the words. I returned to work, but concentration became nearly impossible. Every strange moment from the past 2 days seemed connected by invisible threads. The envelope. The letter. The note. Ethan's questions. Victoria's obvious concern whenever my name entered a conversation. None of it made sense. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered above the estate once again. Rain tapped softly against the windows while staff prepared for another evening of private meetings and dinners. Around 5 o'clock, I finally finished my shift and drove home to Hartford. The familiar streets felt comforting after the overwhelming atmosphere of the mansion. Small houses. Local diners. People carrying grocery bags instead of discussing mergers worth millions. This was the world I understood. My grandmother was already waiting when I arrived. The smell of baked apples filled the kitchen. She smiled the moment she saw me. "You look exhausted." "I feel exhausted." She laughed and pulled me into a hug. For a little while, everything felt normal again. We ate dinner together. Talked about neighbors. Talked about the weather. Talked about anything except billionaires and hidden letters. Then, while clearing dishes, I noticed an old photograph sitting on the counter. I had seen it before many times. Yet tonight, something caught my attention. The photograph showed my grandmother standing beside a woman I barely recognized. Young. Beautiful. Confident. "Who is she?" I asked. My grandmother froze. Only for a second. But I noticed. "An old friend," she answered quietly. "What was her name?" She hesitated. "Margaret Harrington." The plate nearly slipped from my hands. Harrington. My pulse quickened instantly. "As in the Harrington family?" I asked. My grandmother slowly sat down at the kitchen table. Suddenly she looked older than she had that morning. "Emily," she said carefully, "there are some stories that stay buried for a reason." My heart pounded. "Did you know them?" Silence filled the room. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly across the evening sky. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes carried a sadness I had never seen before. I knew them better than you could possibly imagine. Then she reached into a drawer beside the table and removed a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. She placed it gently into my hand. "If anyone ever asks about your mother," she whispered, "do not answer until you open the box this key belongs to." The brass key felt heavier than it should have. I turned it over in my palm while staring at my grandmother across the kitchen table. The faded blue ribbon attached to it looked decades old. "What box?" I asked quietly. She looked away toward the rain-streaked window. "The one in the attic." My heart immediately began racing. In all the years I had lived with her, I had never once gone into the attic. It was always locked. Whenever I asked about it as a child, she simply said it contained old memories. Now I wondered if those memories had been secrets all along. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Her expression softened. "Because other people are starting to ask questions." The room fell silent. I thought about Ethan. Victoria. The missing letter. The note. Somehow all of it seemed connected to a past I knew nothing about. After dinner, my grandmother went to bed earlier than usual. I remained awake. Around 11 o'clock, I finally climbed the narrow staircase leading to the attic door. The old wood creaked beneath my feet. My pulse echoed in my ears. The brass key slid smoothly into the lock as if it had been waiting years for this exact moment. The door opened with a soft click. Dust floated through the beam of my phone flashlight. Boxes lined the walls. Old furniture sat beneath white sheets. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. For several minutes, I searched quietly until I spotted a small wooden chest beneath a covered rocking chair. The blue ribbon attached to the key matched another faded ribbon wrapped around the chest handle. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside were photographs. Letters. Newspaper clippings. A leather journal. At the very top rested a picture that immediately stole my breath. It showed a young version of my grandmother standing beside Margaret Harrington. Both women were smiling. Between them stood a little girl with bright eyes and dark hair. A girl who looked remarkably familiar. My stomach tightened. The child looked like me. I quickly picked up another photograph. Then another. In every image, the same little girl appeared. Sometimes with my grandmother. Sometimes with Margaret Harrington. Sometimes standing beside a younger Charles Harrington himself. "What is this?" I whispered to the empty room. My fingers shook as I opened the leather journal. The first page contained a date from nearly 25 years earlier. Beneath it, written in elegant handwriting, were words that made my heart stop. "If anything happens to me, Emily must know the truth." Emily. My name. The journal slipped slightly in my hands. I turned the page. Before I could read further, my phone suddenly vibrated. The loud sound nearly made me jump. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a woman's voice finally broke the silence. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. "Emily," Victoria said. "We need to talk about what belongs to the Harrington family." My grip tightened around the phone. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The attic suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Below me, the old house remained silent except for the distant sound of rain tapping against the roof. "How did you get this number?" I asked. Victoria laughed softly. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Just confidently. "Emily, there are very few things I cannot find if I decide they matter." My eyes drifted toward the open chest beside me. Photographs covered the floor. The journal remained open to the page bearing my name. "What do you want?" I asked. "To help you avoid making a mistake." Her answer came too quickly. as if she had rehearsed it. I do not need your help. You think that now. A brief silence followed. Listen carefully. There are documents in circulation that do not tell the entire story. People can misunderstand old records. Families can be hurt. My pulse quickened. What documents? That depends on what you have already found. I immediately realized she was fishing for information. The same way Ethan had asked careful questions in the library. Everyone seemed to know something except me. I have no idea what you are talking about, I said. Victoria remained silent for several seconds. Then her voice softened. Emily, some secrets remain hidden because revealing them helps no one. Especially not you. Before I could respond, the call ended. I stared at the dark screen. My reflection looked back at me. Confused. Tired. Frightened. But beneath all of that, something else had begun growing. Determination. Slowly, I returned my attention to the journal. The handwriting remained elegant and precise. I turned the page and began reading. The entry was written by Margaret Harrington herself. She described a car accident that had occurred decades earlier during a winter storm. Charles Harrington had been traveling alone when his vehicle slid off an icy road. According to the journal, help arrived from an unexpected source. A young nurse named Sarah Carter. My breath caught. Carter. My last name. I continued reading. Sarah had remained with Charles for hours until emergency services arrived. Margaret wrote about the friendship that followed. About family dinners. Holiday gatherings. Shared memories. The photographs suddenly made sense. The little girl in those pictures was not a stranger. She belonged there. I turned another page. Then another. The entries became more personal. More emotional. Margaret described Sarah as brave, honest, and loyal. She wrote that Charles often referred to Sarah as the daughter he never had. Tears filled my eyes before I even understood why. Because for the first time in my life, I was reading about my mother through the eyes of someone who loved her. Then I reached the final page. Unlike the others, it contained only a few sentences. Yet those sentences changed everything. If this journal is being read by Emily, then the promise Charles made must finally be honored. The trust belongs to her. It always did. I stared at the words. Trust. Not trust as belief. Trust as inheritance. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it. Beneath the message rested a folded legal document. And at the bottom of the page sat a familiar signature. Charles Harrington. For several seconds, I could not move. The legal document rested in my hands while rain continued tapping softly against the attic roof. Trust belongs to her. It always did. I read the sentence again. Then again. Each time it felt more impossible. People like me did not inherit trusts from billionaire families. People like me worried about rent payments and grocery budgets. We did not appear in legal documents signed by men whose names were printed on skyscrapers. Yet there it was. Black ink on aging paper. Charles Harrington's signature at the bottom. My hand shook as I carefully unfolded the document. The language was formal and complicated, filled with legal terms I barely understood. But one detail stood out immediately. A trust fund had been established more than 20 years earlier for the direct descendant of Sarah Carter. The amount was not listed on the first page. Only references to assets, investments, and future distributions. I turned another page. My breath caught. The value had grown over decades through investments managed by the Harrington family office. Even without understanding every detail, one thing became clear. This was not a symbolic gift. This was life-changing. My knees felt weak. I sat down on the attic floor surrounded by photographs and old memories. Suddenly dozens of strange moments from the past week began fitting together. Ethan's questions. Victoria's concern. The missing letter. Someone had been searching for this information. Someone knew the truth was buried somewhere. And now I knew it too. I barely slept that night. By sunrise, the journal, photographs, and documents were packed carefully inside a box beside my bed. Every time I closed my eyes, new questions appeared. Had Ethan already discovered the trust existed? Was Victoria trying to stop someone from finding it? Most importantly, why had nobody ever told me? The next morning, I returned to the Harrington estate. The mansion looked unchanged. Elegant. Impressive. Untouchable. Yet everything felt different now. For 2 years, I had walked through those halls believing I was invisible. Now I could not shake the feeling that people were watching me. Around mid-morning, I entered the staff lounge to collect supplies. Conversation stopped the moment I walked in. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. One quickly looked away. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. What happened? I asked. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one of the housekeepers stepped forward. Emily, there is a problem. My pulse quickened. What kind of problem? She hesitated. Something valuable is missing from the East Wing. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Missing? A diamond necklace. The room fell silent. Then she added the words that made my heart drop. And someone reported seeing you near the room yesterday. For a moment, I simply stared at her. I knew exactly what was happening. Not because I had taken anything. I had not. But because the timing was too perfect. Someone wanted attention shifted away from old letters, journals, and family secrets. Someone wanted a different story. A simpler story. And suddenly, every eye in the room was looking at me as if I already belonged to it. The accusation spread through the estate faster than any truth ever could. Within an hour, whispers followed me down hallways. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. People who had worked beside me for years suddenly avoided eye contact. I understood why. A missing diamond necklace made a cleaner story than hidden trusts and forgotten promises. Rich families survived scandals by finding simple explanations. And a maid was always a simple explanation. By noon, I was asked to report to the main office. The walk across the estate felt longer than usual. Every step echoed against polished floors. Every glance felt heavier. When I entered the office, 3 people were waiting. The head of security, the estate manager, and Victoria Sinclair. She sat calmly near the window, dressed in white, looking more like a concerned observer than someone involved in the situation. Emily, the estate manager began. A valuable necklace belonging to a guest has been reported missing. I know, I replied quietly. Were you in the East Wing yesterday? Yes. I was cleaning assigned rooms. Did you enter Suite 14? Yes. The security director glanced at a folder in front of him. That was the last location where the necklace was confirmed. I felt anger rising for the first time. Not because of the questions. Because the conclusion already seemed decided. Are you saying I took it? I asked. Nobody answered immediately. Victoria finally spoke. Nobody wants to believe that. Her voice sounded sympathetic. Somehow that made it worse. I looked directly at her. But somebody wants people to think it. The room fell silent. Her expression never changed. Be careful, Emily, she said softly. Accusations can damage people. The irony nearly made me laugh. Before I could respond, the office door opened. Ethan walked inside. The atmosphere changed instantly. Not dramatically. Just enough for everyone to sit a little straighter. He looked around the room before settling his gaze on me. What is happening? He asked. The estate manager explained the situation. Ethan listened without interruption. When the explanation ended, he remained silent for several seconds. Then he asked a single question. Do we have evidence? The security director cleared his throat. Not yet. Then we have speculation. His voice remained calm. Those are not the same thing. Relief washed through me so suddenly that I almost lost my balance. Nobody had defended me. Not once. Until now. Victoria folded her arms. Surely the matter deserves investigation. It does, Ethan agreed. An investigation. Not assumptions. The room became uncomfortably quiet. For the first time, Victoria looked frustrated. Only for a second. But I noticed. Ethan turned toward me. You may return to work. I blinked. That is all? That is all. I left the office before anyone could change their mind. My heart was still racing when I reached the hallway outside. Through the tall windows, afternoon sunlight stretched across the gardens. For the first time all day, I felt able to breathe again. Then my phone vibrated. A new message appeared from an unknown number. Attached was a photograph. My blood ran cold the moment I saw it. It was a security image from the East Wing. And the person carrying the missing necklace was not me. For several seconds, I could only stare at the photograph. The image was grainy, captured by a security camera positioned near the East Wing corridor. Yet it was clear enough to reveal one important fact. The woman holding the necklace was not me. My heart pounded as I zoomed in. The figure wore a dark coat and oversized sunglasses, but the timestamp matched the exact period when everyone believed the necklace had disappeared. Whoever sent the photograph knew the truth. The question was why they had sent it to me. Before I could think further, another message arrived. One sentence. Check the guest registry from gala night. Then the number disappeared. I tried calling back immediately. Nothing. No answer. No voicemail. It was as if the sender had never existed. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I continued working, but my thoughts remained fixed on the photograph. Someone inside the estate had access to security footage. Someone knew I had been framed. And someone wanted me to uncover something bigger. By early evening, most of the senior staff had left. The mansion grew quieter. Shadows stretched across the hallways as sunset painted the windows gold. I found myself standing outside the administrative office where guest records were stored. My pulse quickened. I knew I should walk away. Instead, I knocked. The records clerk looked up from her desk. Emily? I need a favor. 20 minutes later, I sat alone reviewing the gala registry. Hundreds of names filled the pages. Politicians. Investors. Business executives. Family friends. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one entry caught my attention. A guest had signed in using the name Rebecca Hayes. The address field was blank. The contact information was incomplete. Most strange of all, a handwritten note beside the name simply read approved by V.S. Victoria Sinclair. My stomach tightened. I continued searching. A second note appeared beside the same registration. Special access granted to East Wing. My hands froze above the paper. Guests rarely received access to private sections of the estate. Why would Victoria personally authorize it? The answer arrived before I could find one myself. Interesting, isn't it? The voice came from the doorway. I looked up instantly. Ethan stood there. He wore a charcoal suit jacket with the sleeves rolled slightly at the cuffs, as though he had been working late. His eyes moved from the registry to my face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I can explain, I said quickly. To my surprise, he shook his head. I do not think you need to. My heartbeat accelerated. You know about this? I know enough. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Emily, he said quietly, there is something you deserve to know. His expression carried none of the distance I was used to seeing. Only certainty. My father spent years searching for someone. I swallowed hard. Who? Ethan held my gaze. You. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. For a second, I wondered if I had misheard him. Me? I whispered. Ethan nodded. The quiet certainty in his eyes unsettled me more than any dramatic reaction could have. My father never forgot what your mother did for him, he said. And he never stopped looking for her family after they disappeared. I thought about the journal hidden in my bedroom. The photographs. The trust documents. Suddenly none of it felt like coincidence anymore. Why did nobody tell me? I asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. Because somewhere along the way, records vanished. Addresses changed. People moved. What began as a search became a mystery. The room fell silent. Outside the office window, evening settled across the estate grounds. Lights flickered on along the pathways. The mansion looked beautiful from a distance. Yet for the first time, I understood how many secrets could hide behind beautiful things. You knew before today, I said carefully. It was not a question. Ethan looked away briefly before answering. A few weeks ago, I found references to a trust my father created. The beneficiary was never located. My pulse quickened. And then you found me. Not immediately. A faint smile touched his face. At first, I only found your name. I stared at him. Emily Carter. He nodded. The same name that appeared in old correspondence. Suddenly I remembered every unusual interaction from the past few days. The questions. The observations. The way he seemed to notice details nobody else cared about. That is why you asked about my grandmother, I said. Yes. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Ethan reached into his jacket and removed a thin folder. He placed it gently on the desk between us. There is something else you should see. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of old letters. One immediately caught my attention. It was written by Charles Harrington. The date was nearly 20 years old. I scanned the page quickly. Halfway through, my breath caught. If Sarah's daughter is ever found, she must be treated as family. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Family. The word blurred slightly as tears filled my eyes. Not because of money. Not because of the trust. Because all my life I had felt invisible. Easily overlooked. Easily dismissed. Yet decades ago, someone powerful had written those words about me before he had ever met me. Ethan watched quietly while I composed myself. Victoria knows about this, does not she? I finally asked. His expression hardened. She discovered fragments of it. And the necklace? Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. The investigation is almost finished. The answer told me everything. Someone had wanted a distraction. Someone had wanted attention focused on me for all the wrong reasons. Before I could ask another question, Ethan looked directly into my eyes. Emily, he said softly, there is a board meeting tomorrow morning. My stomach tightened. Why are you telling me that? His next words changed everything. Because tomorrow, the truth becomes public. The next morning arrived with clear skies and a strange sense of calm. After days of confusion, secrets, and unanswered questions, I woke up knowing that everything was about to change. The Harrington headquarters occupied the top floors of a glass tower overlooking downtown Hartford. I had passed the building hundreds of times before. I never imagined I would one day walk through its front doors. My reflection in the revolving glass entrance looked exactly the same as always. The same Emily Carter. The same woman who had spent 2 years cleaning guest rooms and polishing silver trays. Yet the security guards greeted me by name. Assistants escorted me upstairs. Board members glanced toward me as I entered the conference room. The difference was not who I had become overnight. The difference was that people finally knew who I had always been. The room fell silent when Ethan entered. He took his place at the head of the table and opened the meeting without hesitation. Financial reports came first. Corporate updates followed. Then he reached for a separate folder. The atmosphere changed instantly. "There is one final matter," he said. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Ethan calmly presented the documents his father had signed decades earlier. The trust. The journal entries. The correspondence. The evidence connecting Sarah Carter and her family to the Harrington legacy. No dramatic speeches. No exaggerated emotions. Just facts. Clear. Undeniable facts. Murmurs spread across the room as board members reviewed the documents. Some looked surprised. Others looked embarrassed. A few glanced toward me with expressions I could not quite read. Then Ethan displayed security records connected to the missing necklace investigation. The truth emerged quickly. The guest registered under a false identity had removed the necklace. The evidence showed that I had never been involved. Every accusation collapsed under the weight of the facts. Across the table, Victoria sat perfectly still. For the first time since I had met her, she seemed uncertain. Not angry. Not defeated. Simply confronted by a reality she could no longer control. When the presentations ended, silence settled over the room. Ethan stood and looked directly at me. "My father believed that gratitude should outlive circumstance," he said. "Promises matter. Character matters. And honoring both matters most of all." Then he did something nobody expected. He walked around the table and stopped in front of me. The room watched in complete silence. Slowly, he lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed across the conference room. My heart nearly stopped. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed a worn envelope protected inside a leather sleeve. I recognized the Harrington seal immediately. It was the missing letter. The letter everyone had been searching for. He placed it gently in my hands. "This belonged to my father," he said quietly. "He wanted it delivered personally if you were ever found." Tears blurred my vision as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten message from Charles Harrington. The final line struck me hardest. "Your mother saved my life. No fortune can repay that debt. But respect can. Family can. And gratitude must." When I looked up, Ethan was still there. His expression was calm, sincere, and completely free of obligation. "They saw an employee," he said softly. "My father saw family. And I see someone whose worth never depended on a title." In that moment, I understood something that money could never buy. The greatest treasure was never the trust. It was being seen. Truly seen. Not for what I owned. Not for where I worked. But for who I was. And sometimes, that kind of recognition can change an entire life.